All right, let's take a closer look at an affordable reproduction of the best cutting sword in the world. Allegedly, not my quote. As you probably know, I don't subscribe to this notion that there is such a thing as the bestest ever without specifying usage and other important circumstance. No epic background this time because this sword is a little bit too large to cram into my backpack and crawl around on the rocks at the coast, you know, the way I did with the Yataghan review. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen that one yet, I would recommend watching that first because a lot of things I said about the Yataghan from Swordbuy also apply to this one. This is a Kilij, was sent to me as a free review sample. And I'm going to tell you what I think about it. You know, how well it's made, how well it performed, etc., etc. Just a couple of words about what it is. As is so often the case, the term Kilij translates to simply sword. It's just convenient to use it as a term to specify this particular type. Compared to a Persian shamshir, the Ottoman Kilij usually has a broader blade with a less pronounced curvature. And in the 18th century, there was a tendency to make the blade shorter and give it a more abrupt curve, where it starts out pretty much straight and then suddenly there's a very strong bend in it. I've seen a statement that a Kilij can thrust while a shamshir cannot due to its stronger curvature, and I disagree with that. Depending on which particular one you look at, the difference in curvature isn't all that extreme. There are more strongly curved examples of the Kilij and less strongly curved examples of a shamshir, and sometimes they move pretty close to one another. This tip shape is suitable for thrusts despite the curvature. Now, with a strongly curved blade, you're not going to be able to deliver as powerful a thrust as you can with a straight blade, which aligns everything a little bit more favorably biomechanically. But you most certainly can, and in fact you can do it from angles that would be difficult to do with a straight blade. So instead of just trying to thrust straight forward like this, that's not going to be very useful, but you can either thrust upward or, again, around, which can be useful. You can go around the guard, things like that. And you can, in my opinion, you can do that with a shamshir just as well as with a Kilij. Anyway, so let's just get something out of the way. It comes with a tassel, which is nice to look at. But here's what I always do with tassels. They serve no practical purpose. It's said that the Kilij was favored by Vlad Țepeș, aka Vlad the Impaler, who was famously fond of the Ottomans and also served as the historical inspiration for a certain fanged gentleman.
I am Vlad Dracula Țepeș.
I wasn't able to find any specific sources that substantiate this claim. There is a portrait of Vlad showing him with a saber, which is difficult to see because it's in its scabbard and he has his hand on the hilt, so you can't quite see. It could very well be a Kilij, but that portrait is from the 17th century, which is a little bit after the 15th century when he was active. All right, on to this reproduction. The blade, just like the Yataghan, is made of 1060 high carbon steel. The overall length is about 92 centimeters. 90 to 92, depends on how you want to measure it with such a curvature. And the weight is 1.1 kilograms or 2 pounds, 7 ounces. The examples I've found vary quite a lot. Basically anything from a bit over half a kilogram to about 1.2 kilograms. There is no distal taper. The blade is of uniform thickness throughout. I don't know if originals had a distal taper. Either way, in this price range, you pretty much can't expect one. And this sword doesn't need one. It's light enough. And the balance is actually pretty close to the hilt, but not too terribly close because you want a certain amount of blade presence. And yeah, it's very easy to move this around. Even purely wrist-powered cuts are quite easy. And if you bring your elbow into it, of course, you can move it pretty quickly. And you can also go for these big sweeping shoulder-powered cuts. And it has plenty of authority in the cuts. Certainly not something you could just tank in a historical duel or on the battlefield. Certainly a formidable blade. There's one thing that bothers me, which is The yelmen, which is this widened tip section here, is generally supposed to be sharpened, as far as I know, and this one isn't. It's not the same thickness as the spine, but it's not fully sharpened, so you can actually use it for cutting, which is kind of important. This is definitely used in a number of ways with a saber like that, and I would have liked to see that. You can do it yourself, but the blade thickness here is still substantial, so it would require quite a bit of grinding. So that's a bit disappointing. What's not disappointing is how it cuts. Oh, damn, that was easy. By the way, I don't know which grip was used with this type of sword. Historically, there are a number of different options. You can use a hammer grip, either up here or right down by the pommel to make sure it doesn't slip out of your hand. You could use a saber grip, either with the thumb on the back or not, or you could also hold it this way, the finger over the guard, which obviously endangers the finger, but gives you even more control. And then of course for a tactical surprise, you can quickly switch to reverse grip. No, I'm just kidding. Like I mentioned in the Yataghan review, I was actually biased against these swords due to their appearance mainly, because they have the look of a budget sword or even wall hanger. You know, like this mirror polish on the blade, and especially like these very simple brass fittings that are also mirror polished. I've seen that a lot in really cheap swords that don't perform at all. So that threw me off a little bit, which is why I went pretty hard with this. So will it cut? Bet your turban it will. The edge is properly sharp, and unlike the Yataghan, the blade grind is a lot better. The edge bevel is not as steep and abrupt, it's more blended in, and that difference is very obvious when cutting tatami mats. With good edge alignment, this blade will cut extremely cleanly and with very little effort for a single-handed sword. Especially in this price range, I'm not used to seeing such good cutting performance. There are plenty of swords on the market that you can have for, you know, $200 to $300 US that have something wrong with them and tend to come with pretty terrible edges and blade geometry overall. They're not all that good for cutting for the most part, unless you change it yourself. But this, out of the box, cuts beautifully. Then of course I also tested how well it's put together, whether it would loosen up or something might bend or break. And it really did not at all. I repeatedly hacked into a particle board as a stand-in for wooden shields and bone and other materials that are not metal. And it took that no problem, didn't get damaged in any way, didn't bend, etc. And then I did a realistic test against the Yataghan, performing various deflections and blocks with the spine and the flat of the blade, which went way better than I expected. It's still completely solid, not even a hint of rattle or anything. There are two small nicks right here, because even when you try to use just the flat and the spine, sometimes you may still make partial contact with the edge. But these did not go far at all, and the steel overall seems pretty hard and durable. The handle is very good. I can't compare it directly to historical originals because there just aren't enough close-up pictures from different angles that I could compare the shape. This is fairly narrow, but still allows me well enough to index the edge. It's not particularly difficult. The pommel also helps with that. And it being asymmetrical, you get a little bit more of a feel for it. It's pretty smooth, slightly slippery, but again, the pommel helps you retain the sword, so it's not really a problem. So it's rounded. You don't have any hard corners that would become uncomfortable. The only rough spots are on the guard right up here, which are parts that you never touch. Even if you put your index finger over the quillon, you still don't come in contact with those rough spots. So not an issue here. Really, the only complaint or downside, I would say, aside from the yelmen being unsharpened, is just the overall look. The general shape does represent the historical originals for the most part, but the finish, not so much. This is basically, it's a budget version. I mean, obviously it's budget priced, so you pretty much have to expect that. When you compare this hilt to some of the originals, this one just lacks character. You know what I mean? Most of the originals have some sort of decorative touches. Some are pretty simple, but even then they look less tacky. I don't know if that's too harsh of a word, but this mirror polished brass I'm just not a fan of. It looks, yeah, it's a kind of wall hangery. You know, it's not a problem and you can change it yourself. I mean, you could absolutely sand it and maybe even apply salt and vinegar to artificially age it. Like, there's definitely things you can do. It's just, you get what you pay for, which is fair. That's cheap for a sword like this, especially considering how well it performs, how well it handles, how well it cuts. It's really nothing you can shake a stick at, or a sword. Even more so considering that apparently it comes with a scabbard. I didn't receive one with this, but it's shown on the website. And scabbards quite often either are not included or it's like a crappy thin leather sheath or whatever. This, going by the pictures, looks pretty decent. So definitely worth recommending if you're looking for a functional reproduction that won't break the bank. The link is going to be in the description below. Hope you found this interesting and informative. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks.